A city doesn't tremble for just any visiting team. Toronto has seen championship runs. It has watched Hall of Famers walk through its stadium gates. It has hosted playoff battles that left its fanbase breathless and heartbroken and everything in between. The Rogers Centre has absorbed decades of baseball history within its walls, and the Blue Jays, faithful, passionate, loud, and fiercely protective of their home ground, are not the kind of crowd that rattles easily. And yet, the moment the news broke that the Los Angeles Dodgers were arriving in Toronto, something shifted in this city that goes far beyond ordinary pre-series anticipation. Something older and more complicated. Something that lives in the specific memory of a fanbase that remembers exactly what happened the last time this particular collection of players showed up and what it cost them. The Blue Jays fans weren't just preparing for a baseball series. They were preparing for a reckoning. And at the absolute center of everything, the name on every tongue, the face on every phone screen, the reason grown adults in Blue Jays jerseys were posting on social media about checking under their beds before going to sleep, was one man. Shohei Ohtani had arrived in Toronto. And nothing about this city would feel normal until he left. There is a specific kind of electricity that follows Shohei Ohtani wherever he travels in Major League Baseball. It isn't the ordinary excitement that accompanies a star player visiting a road city. Every sport has those moments, the visiting superstar who draws a slightly larger crowd, generates a few extra headlines, and then departs after the series with the energy returning to baseline. What happens when Ohtani arrives somewhere is categorically different. It begins before he even steps off the plane. In Toronto, the conversation started days in advance. Social media threads dedicated entirely to tracking the Dodgers' travel schedule began accumulating thousands of interactions. Local sports radio hosts who would normally spend their pre-series coverage analyzing pitching matchups and lineup construction instead found themselves fielding call after call from fans who wanted to talk about one thing and one thing only. How do you stop Shohei Ohtani? The honest answer, the answer that Blue Jays fans deep down already know even if they refuse to say it out loud, is that you don't stop him. You manage him. You survive him. You hope that on this particular series, on these particular days, the baseball gods decide to give your pitching staff a small measure of mercy. But hope is not a strategy. And Toronto knew it. When the Dodgers bus pulled toward Rogers Centre and the cameras positioned outside captured that first glimpse of Ohtani stepping out, that familiar, unhurried walk, that quiet confidence that never tips into arrogance, the footage spread across Toronto's sports community within minutes. He was here. The reckoning had begun. To understand why Toronto's reaction to Ohtani's arrival carries such a specific emotional charge, you have to go back. Blue Jays fans have a memory. A vivid, detailed, still slightly painful memory of what this man did to their team the last time the circumstances aligned and Ohtani was locked in and the Rogers Centre crowd was at full volume believing, genuinely believing, that tonight might be the night their pitchers finally figured him out. It wasn't. The details of that performance live in Toronto's baseball consciousness the way certain games always do, not as statistics in a record book but as a shared emotional experience that a fanbase carries collectively. The kind of game where you were watching with friends and at some point everyone went quiet because what was happening on the field was simply too large for commentary. When the first Toronto fan posted, "It's a continuation of that day," on social media as the Dodgers' arrival was confirmed, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of Blue Jays fans knew exactly which day was being referenced. No additional context was needed. No explanation was required. The phrase functioned as a password, a shared acknowledgement between members of a community that had watched the same thing happen and had been quietly dreading the possibility of watching it happen again. This is the particular power Ohtani has accumulated over his career in ways that go beyond wins and losses and batting averages. He has created memories in opposing cities. Specific, crystalline, unforgettable memories that live in fan communities and get referenced years later when he comes back around on the schedule. Toronto has one of those memories. And as he stepped off that bus, every Blue Jays fan who had been in the building that day felt it resurface. But Toronto is not a city that surrenders quietly. This is important to understand. The anxiety surrounding Ohtani's arrival coexists with something else, a genuine, defensible, baseball-grounded belief that this Blue Jays team has weapons of its own. That this is not simply an exercise in damage limitation. That the home crowd at Rogers Center means something, and that the players wearing Blue Jays uniforms are capable of making this series genuinely competitive. And the battle cry that emerged from the fanbase captured this spirit perfectly. We have Kazuma. 3 words. Completely simple. Carrying enormous weight. Because what Blue Jays fans were expressing in that phrase was not delusion or wishful thinking. They were making a legitimate argument. They were saying that while the Dodgers have Ohtani, while the Dodgers have arguably the most complete offensive force the game has seen in a generation, the Blue Jays have their own answer. Their own player who carries a particular kind of threat, who represents their own version of an X factor, who gives their fanbase something real to believe in when the conversation turns to individual matchups and momentum shifts and the unpredictable human drama that makes baseball different from every other sport. The "we have Kazuma" sentiment spread rapidly because it felt true in a way that pure bravado never does. It acknowledged reality. Yes, Ohtani is Ohtani, and pretending otherwise would be embarrassing, while simultaneously refusing to accept the conclusion that reality might seem to imply. It said, "We see what you have, and we're showing up anyway, and we have reasons to believe this won't go the way you think." That combination of clear-eyed acknowledgement and stubborn competitive pride is exactly what makes baseball rivalries feel meaningful rather than merely scheduled. Toronto was not conceding. Toronto was competing. And the energy inside Rogers Center in the hours before first pitch reflected that completely. And then there was this. Because Shohei Ohtani was not the only reason Toronto's preparation for this series had taken on an almost surreal quality of anxious anticipation. Arriving alongside him, part of the same devastating, almost unfairly constructed Dodgers roster, was Yoshinobu Yamamoto. The pitcher who, in his own right, represents a kind of problem that opposing lineups have not yet developed a fully satisfying answer for. When a Toronto fan posted, "I'll check under my bed for Yamamoto before I go to sleep," the response from the Blue Jays community was immediate and enormous, not because it was simply funny, though it was genuinely funny, but because it captured something emotionally true about what it feels like to face this particular Dodgers rotation. It feels like a threat that follows you home. Yamamoto on the mound is not the same kind of problem as Ohtani in the lineup, but it belongs to the same category of problem, the kind where your preparation and your game plan and your at-bats need to be absolutely precise because the margin for error against this level of pitching is essentially zero. Blue Jays hitters who had faced Yamamoto before understood this viscerally. He doesn't give you anything comfortable to work with. He doesn't have an obvious weakness that a lineup can attack collectively and systematically. He has the kind of varied, deceptive, intelligently deployed arsenal that requires hitters to make extremely difficult decisions extremely quickly, and when those decisions are wrong, even slightly wrong, the results are discouraging in the specific way that elite pitching is always discouraging. The joke about checking under the bed wasn't really about fear. It was about respect. The particular kind of respect that competitors pay each other when the competition is genuine and the stakes are real and everyone involved understands exactly how good the person across from them actually is. Toronto respected Yamamoto enough to make jokes about him. That, in baseball terms, is a significant acknowledgement. And then the Dodgers released their lineup. And Toronto went quiet in a very specific way. Not the quiet of defeat or resignation. The quiet of a fanbase looking at something and doing the rapid mental calculation that all baseball fans do when the stakes are high and the opposition puts its full hand on the table. The lineup that emerged, built around Ohtani at its core, constructed with the kind of depth and balance that reflects the Dodgers' resource advantages and roster construction philosophy, sent a message that went beyond individual names and batting order positions. It said, "We are bringing everything." The 3 names that anchored the most conversation, the 3 elements of the Dodgers' offensive and pitching construction that Blue Jays fans fixated on in the hours before first pitch, represented something larger than individual talent. They represented a philosophy. A statement about what championship-caliber baseball looks like when an organization commits fully to assembling the best possible collection of players and then trusts those players to perform on the biggest stages against the best competition. Ohtani in the lineup. Yamamoto available on the mound. The surrounding cast built to complement and amplify both of them. For Blue Jays fans scrolling through the confirmed lineup details, the reaction ranged from dark humor to genuine strategic analysis to the kind of resigned appreciation that even fierce partisans feel when they encounter something that is undeniably excellent even while hoping desperately for it to fail. The shock wasn't that the Dodgers were good. Everyone already knew the Dodgers were good. The shock was seeing it confirmed so completely and so specifically, seeing the names aligned in that particular order on that particular night in their particular city, and feeling the full weight of what their team was about to walk into. By the time the gates opened and the Blue Jays faithful began filling Rogers Center, the atmosphere inside the stadium had taken on a quality that longtime Toronto fans recognized as something rare. This wasn't standard home game energy. Standard home game energy is warm and familiar and comfortable, the rituals of a fanbase settling into their seats, the anticipation building gradually, the sense that you are about to watch a baseball game that you hope your team wins. What Rogers Center felt like on this night was different. More charged. More aware of its own historical weight. More conscious that what was about to happen mattered in a way that extended beyond the standings and the box score. The Blue Jays fans who filled those seats had come carrying their memories of that day. They had come carrying, "We have Kazuma," as both a battle cry and a genuine belief. They had come having made their jokes about checking under their beds and having felt the specific electric anxiety of knowing that Yamamoto was in the building. They had come ready. Because this is what Toronto does. This city doesn't shrink from the moment, doesn't go through the motions of attendance without genuine investment. When the stakes are highest and the opposition is most formidable, Rogers Center becomes exactly what a baseball stadium is supposed to be, a place where the crowd becomes a participant rather than an audience, where the noise and the energy and the collective will of 50,000 people exerts a real force on what happens on the field. The Blue Jays needed every single decibel of it. There is something that happens to a city when Shohei Ohtani arrives. It isn't fear, exactly. It isn't paralysis or resignation or the quiet acceptance of inevitability. It is something more complicated and more interesting than any of those things. It is the specific, heightened awareness that comes from knowing you are in the presence of something genuinely historic. That the player warming up in that visiting dugout, wearing that unfamiliar uniform, moving through his pre-game routine with that characteristic calm, that player is going to be talked about for decades. That your children will know his name. That the games he plays in your stadium will be part of the permanent record of what this sport looked like at its highest level during this particular era. Toronto knew all of that. And Toronto showed up anyway. With their memories of that day. With their belief in Kazuma. With their jokes about Yamamoto under the bed and their noise and their blue jerseys and their fierce, uncompromising refusal to treat a home game against even the greatest player in baseball as anything other than a genuine competition. Because that is what baseball rivalries demand. Not surrender. Not awe without resistance. Not the passive appreciation of excellence from a safe distance. But the willingness to stand across from the best in the world, on your own field, in front of your own people, and say, "We see you. We respect you. We're coming anyway." Shohei Ohtani had arrived in Toronto. And Toronto was ready.